I am now back in the main studio with my friend and colleague Ian Mile, continuing the theme of today about commodity technologies, about Netscape being the new ChatGPT. We now move to the final section of this podcast, which is our consulting advice of the week. And the question, I think it's a brilliant question, is this: how do you win with commodity technologies? And on this topic, we have three separate but related pieces of advice, don't we, Ian?
Yeah. So the first one is, I guess, the companies have this huge fear, don't they, of not being first to things. And I think people worry too much about, our customers certainly worry too much about that, which doesn't mean you should just completely ignore it forever, but you shouldn't fear not being first. You don't have to go all in on it straight away.
Exactly. So we could summarize as our first sort of stock bit of advice is don't fear being a late mover. There are advantages to going first, but there are advantages to going last. We're going to come to that in a second. Now, our second point is you should use you should use commodity tech to amplify your position, right? That's the second big bit of what we talk about.
Yeah. So you use it in a complementary way to enhance your existing commercial proposition, rather than looking for it to revolutionize everything that you do.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So that's about taking something that might be a commodity that will give you no competitive advantage, but when you join it with what you do have and your proprietary offering, then you start to get, I guess, more advantage for yourself and more of a defensible position. Now, the third thing is, and we're going to go into details about all of these in a second, is about experimenting cheaply and scaling smartly. And usually executives will say, go big or go home. This is absolutely terrible advice.
Yeah, especially in the early days.
Well, yeah, because that's what do we always say? A quick ramp up is usually followed by a quicker and humiliating ramp back down. So let's get into each one of those, Ian. So we're going to, as I said, don't fear being a late mover, use commodity tech to amplify your position, and 3, experiment cheap, scale smartly. What on earth do we mean when we talk about don't fear being a late mover?
Well, when a new technology comes out, there is a FOMO that hits people. And I mean, again, from our younger days, we'll remember the .com boom, and everyone had to have a website. And 99% of those companies, especially the venture capital funded ones that built websites, died. They were early movers, but they hadn't learned the hard-won lessons of other people. And so the ones that did succeed were the ones that perhaps built from smaller bases up. I think the only real survivor from that era is Amazon. I can't think of many others who've lasted that long from the very first .com boom.
Sometimes when I'm dealing with executives, they get afraid. They do get FOMO, the fear of missing out. And I say to them things like MySpace, Friends Reunited. They were earlier social networks than Facebook. Facebook was in many ways the last social media. It learned all the lessons of what came before it and absolutely nailed that business model. And so when we think about being a late mover, you get to take advantage from all the failures and all the lessons learned from people who had tried and, of course, not succeeded. And as a consultancy, our job is to keep abreast of what's going on out there, learn those failures on behalf of our customers, and try to help them, stepping on the same landmines. We don't always succeed, of course, because sometimes our customers don't always listen to us. If we think about cloud native transformation, we'll get to generative AI in a second. But if you think of cloud native transformation, we've been doing this professionally for over 10 years, and we've helped a lot of customers succeed. And what was experimental 10 years ago is now best practice. So in terms of moving to the cloud now, this is a pretty good moment to go because everything is reasonably mature, not just the technology, but the processes by which you transform and you change your operations. So being late to the cloud is not a bad thing. I mean, you've probably lost a bit of advantage in the last 5 years, but you're going to go quicker than people who were pioneering back in 2009.
But there's another point there, Jamie, which is that the difficulty with these transformations is not just whether you should use Istio or a different service mesh, or which version of Kubernetes should you use. It's the organizational changes and the cultural, behavioral changes that you need to make in order for that new way of working to succeed. And that's difficult whenever you do it.
That is difficult whenever you do it. Yeah, that is true. But at least we've got a bigger body of knowledge now. So 10 years ago, our last episode about talent, we spoke about how I was thrown out of an office because I suggested the potential customer needed to change their hiring practices. I'd like to think that discussion would be a little bit easier 10 years later. Although given how stubborn lots of people can be, maybe that's not true. Let me move us along now into this second part of our advice, because I think this needs a little bit of unpacking. So the second leg of our advice is make sure you use commodity technology to amplify or embed into your existing position or business. What do we mean by that?
I think there's a attempt to take the technology, commodity technology, and then build your business around it. And I think what we're saying here is use it in combination with whatever you have in a proprietary way to augment and improve, at least initially, to augment and improve your existing technologies. So don't necessarily go into a really deep level with those new technologies. Just use them to amplify your existing moat. So usually that's some sort of data that you've got, right? That's what we're thinking of.
When it comes to generative AI, the data's yours. That is, once upon a time they said data is the new oil. So we work with a lot of customers. They've got decades worth of data on their customers, on the way their systems are used, on I don't know, widgets flying around a supply chain. Do not give that up to anybody. That is your competitive advantage. If you take a commodity tool, and we think that chatbots, Claude and Mistral and OpenAI, we think they've got commodity products. Well, don't give them your data, but instead bring their tools in-house to amplify the competitive advantage you've already got. That's definitely one area. But then, of course, there are workflows as well. And we've seen some of our friends in the community have brought in Claude Code, and we're not saying that coding's the bottleneck, and we're definitely not saying that AI can do the job of a decent programmer. But what Claude has been doing, what Claude Code has done, is amplify the best developers who are really comfortable with having Claude in the workflow, and actually shown a big chunk of organizations that they've kind of carrying programmers who are maybe a little bit out of the game or maybe not as productive as their colleagues. That gives a new lens onto how these tools can be embedded in terms of programming workflows, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, yes. I mean, I think we're seeing, I guess, I see stories about this every week, and I hear anecdotes from colleagues all the time. It does feel that there is something shifting about the way that at least certain companies are building software. So there was initially this big buzz, you can fire all your developers and you're good to go with AI. And those people had to backtrack. But I think increasingly people are working out in a more granular way how they can actually restructure their software development lifecycle around AI.
I was going to say, and it's fair to say that's what we're doing, right? Our competitive advantage is our people, our creativity, the processes we've got. We're pretty good at what we do. We're using AI all along our development lifecycle just to either go quicker or go smarter, but nobody's getting replaced. Nobody's getting sort of booted out of the company. We're just taking the best tools and then applying them to what we already do. But that's what we've been doing for 10 years. And sometimes those tools have got, you could tag as AI, which is a shit tag anyway, by the way. I don't think it makes much sense as a name, but moving that to a side.
This one company we heard about that is saying they're completely restructuring the way they deliver their software. So before they used to have engineers building stuff as in the traditional way. Now they're saying those engineers are now doing continuous integration work. They're making sure that the tests work, that the end product is correct. So it's like CI and QA, if you like. And they just let the models go away and propose the solution.
Is that working
and they
for
can
them?
do that. Well, I think it is. And I think it's partly because what they're producing is relatively discrete and easily testable. And so just throwing more LLMs at it seems to be working, but they still want the engineers to do something. Whether they need as many engineers in the future, I think that's the That's the question, that you could have fewer and fewer engineers.
Let me give you an example of the opposite of this advice. So our advice is take commodity technologies and bring them into your organization to amplify what you do. That's what our customers are doing. That's what we're doing. But I saw on Reddit, and you've got to think, is this a joke? But I don't think it's a joke. I think it's real. The manager, CEO, executive team came out and said, right, this is the last day of business as usual. From Monday onwards, we're a Claude first company. And everybody was like, what the fucking hell does that mean? Claude first company. Okay, fine, we'll explain. If you're a developer, you're using Claude Code. If you're a product owner with a backlog of prioritized tasks, you're using Claude to organize your tasks. If you work in PR, you're writing your press releases with Claude. So this is the opposite of what we advise, because what they're doing is changing all of the workflow and the proprietary tools and the way people create and forcing a tool on them that some people might not want. I don't think it's going to work out for this Claude first company. So you need to keep your eye on Reddit to find out the end of that story.
I've heard of similar mandates that engineers are told, you're working on this project and you must use AI, which seems perverse to me.
Well, and of course, what then happens is, people roll out a bunch of tools and they tell the present investors or future investors, hey, we're an AI company, and bang, all of a sudden the game changes, but the results will not. Okay, that brings us on to our third piece of advice here. So let's just summarize quickly so people don't get lost, especially in this age of low concentration spans.
Low context windows, yeah.
So number one, don't be afraid to move late. Number two, use commodity tools to amplify what you're doing. And number three, experiment cheaply and scale smartly. This probably has got implications for people, as I said earlier, dipping their big toe into the world of Gen AI, right?
Yeah, so while I think our advice, this is sort of a modifier to our advice, don't fear being a late mover. That's advice to say don't feel you have to go all in on something straight away as soon as you hear about it. On the other hand, with companies that come to it late, they struggle with that transformation bit that we talked about, the sort of cultural, behavioral, organizational changes that need to be made. The way to straddle that challenge is to use the 3 horizons idea, which I think we've talked about before, where you have a short-term, medium-term, and long-term horizon. Now, long-term is where you make your big bets and you say, right, we're investing in the next 5 years, we're going to invest, multi-millions and change the way we work. That's for things where with great certainty what the outcome will be. You know that the world is moving in this direction. It's a proven business model, and so on.
You've teed me up nicely there, Ian. Let me, for those people listening in, explain the 3 horizon model very briefly. I'll try to do this as briefly as possible. So the 3 horizons is something we've been using at Container Solutions for a very long time. And I read about it, if you can believe it, in an A-level textbook. And I thought it was invented by somebody at McKinsey, but I think the McKinsey people read this A-level business textbook. But anyway, the 3 horizons goes something like this. The first sort of move you can make in order to de-risk something, stage 1, if you will, is called a no-regret move. So these are quick, low-cost actions that benefit you no matter what happens next. So, for example, if you're moving into the world of generative AI, playing around with Claude, trying to go a little bit quicker with these chatbots is a pretty low-risk, no-regret move. But however, as things progress and as you start to get some baseline knowledge, we move over to something called options or hedges. So this is after you've run a few small experiments and a few promising paths are emerging. This is when you run proof of concepts, and they might take a couple of months, if not years. Now, I don't want to spoil the surprise because I'm doing a webinar about this in a few weeks, but close to me where I live in London, there is a prototype supermarket that uses artificial intelligence. Now, I don't know what it's cost to run this supermarket, let's say £1 or £2 million. However, if the result of this experiment works, this option of theirs, then they can scale across the whole organisation. And then the third horizon is actually what we call big bets. So this is when you've de-risked an idea enough with no regret moves, options and hedges, and then you're ready to lay serious money into this idea, whether that's a movement to the cloud or a generative AI implementation, for want of a better word. I'm hearing shit about AI transformations now. That sounds pretty bogus to me. But I think the point is that a lot of executives go big early, and this is a mistake. So there are two sensible things you could do. Make a load of no-regret moves, small experiments, then do some options, a number of them, which cost you money, but they won't break the bank. And only at that point, this is about scaling smart, do you start to think about laying your big bets on what comes next. So that's the 3 horizons.
I think people underestimate the amount you can learn with just 1 or 2 people looking at a new way of doing things. So you invest a small amount, let's say you get 2 of your key staff to look at something for 6 months. They go off and try lots of different things. By the end of that 6 months, they'll have a lot of experience, which means that the cost of doing anything in the future in that area will be massively reduced, because you won't be looking around to see if anyone outside has experience. You'll know and trust the people in your business who understands how they can make it work for them. So even if they don't produce anything significant in those 6 months, when you do come to say, right, the world has moved to AI, we have to invest in this now, or we're not in business, you can use those people. And what we see with a lot of companies is they don't have that collective experience of cloud technologies anywhere in the business because no one's been allowed to work on it.
You know, it's really funny. People overcomplicate things. When I was the chief executive, spoiler alert for those who haven't heard the news, by the way, I'm no longer the chief executive of Container Solutions. When I was in charge and something needed to be de-risked, I would just ask 1 or 2 people, can you kick the tires on this for me? Can you take a look at this for me? And now in reverse, CSTV, what you're listening to or watching right now, we de-risked that in the last half of 2025. So we experimented with the Visionaries and Rebels podcast. We tested out some different software. Some things went well, some things went wrong. But when we felt we had the workflow, we were ready to lay a bigger bet, namely to put CSTV together in 2026. In real life, this stuff's super practical. What can I do here? How much can I learn? What we didn't do was engage some sort of agency and spend hundreds of thousands of pounds and say to them, tell us what is the current state of podcasting and content marketing, because we needed to figure out that for ourselves. I think that's such a good example of us using no regret moves at the beginning, followed by a pretty simple options before laying our big bet. So I feel this stuff works at every scale. And you're dead right. Find 1 or 2 people who can, play around and feed the lessons they learn back into the organization.
Yeah, and usually those 1 or 2 people are really motivated to learn as much as they can as quickly as possible. And yeah, if you keep them happy and use them right and learn the lessons of what they're doing, then you can get real value out of that.
I think we're coming to the end of this section where we talk about advice we've got for our customers or potential customers or friends in the community. But I want to ask you a follow-up question. Why do people psychologically get this so wrong? Why do they do big things without thinking about it? And why do they stop 1 or 2 enthusiastic people from trying something new? It's like irrational. If you wouldn't do that in your private life, why do people do that in their business life?
We talked about fear of missing out, right? And I think investors who own companies have that in spades. They're not necessarily the most patient people. And so they hear about something new and they say, we've got to get on this right now. Let's invest loads in it because that'll make sure it works. It's a bit like the mythical man month fallacy, right? This idea that if you spend loads of money on a project, it's gonna definitely produce something good. Whereas the people on the ground know that things move in a much more slow, piecemeal fashion towards the goal. So I think there is that mismatch. And certainly the companies we see that are getting super excited about AI, that excitement seems to be coming from the board, from the top level, who just want it to happen because they see it as a good story for their brand or their business or their bottom line. Well, not bottom line, their exit.
Right. Yeah, indeed. Okay, so thank you, Ian, for answering this question. Obviously, for all those listeners or viewers who are interested in this stuff, there is an up-and-coming webinar with me. It is covered in, I can't remember, chapter 14 of my book, Visionaries, Rebels and Machines, but you do not have to rush out and buy that because that exact chapter is available at www.containersolutions.com/visionaries. So you can grab those chapters and they'll help you with this specific question. And obviously, if you've got any follow-ups, just ping us a message on LinkedIn or email or whatever. So Ian, thank you so much, and we'll see all of you next time. Thanks for watching Container Solutions TV. If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe on YouTube and follow Container Solutions on LinkedIn for cut down parts and weekly clips. If you want help with platform engineering, cloud native transformation, or you need to follow the money in order to change how you operate your cloud at scale, then visit our website using the links below and get in touch. We'll see you in the next episode.